I want to tear the moon out of the sky and up the sun. For the podcast and more details, visit www.freeamericans.com or catch the podcast by phone by calling 832-999-8621.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of the Free American. I am your host. I am Clay Douglas, and my guest today is John Kaminski. Hello, John. How are you?
Good morning, Clayton. I'm as well as could be expected, considering the condition I'm in. No, I'm fine.
Yeah, if I'd known I was going to live this long, I would have taken better care of myself.
That's what Mickey Mantle said.
Well, John, the only thing, been a couple of things that I've been looking at and talking about on my last week of shows. One is the illegal situation we've got here. We've got not only the Mexican Central Americans being bussed in here, but now we've got the invasion in Europe and America. We'll go up to Dearborn, Michigan, and see if you see how you get along up there. What do we? This looks to me to be genocide. Flat out genocide, picking on the white race, and they don't care whether you're German, English, French, or American. They don't care.
Or Russian.
Or Russian. And that's the other thing. They're trying to stir up a war with Russia again, and I don't believe the Cold War, the Russians were never our enemy, were they?
I just told somebody in St. Petersburg the other day that I felt that the Americans and the Russians were brothers. At least that was the situation during the Civil War when the Tsar sent those ships to back up Abe Lincoln's efforts to keep the country together, and he agreed. But a certain force in the world has done its best to drive the two countries apart. If I can go back just a little bit in history to do that, when in 1905, when the Russo-Japanese War happened, and the United States sided with the Japanese because Jacob Schiff had armed the Japanese and to take out all these loans. The Russians were shocked because they thought the U.S. and the Russian Empire were allies, and the U.S. Behind the motivation of the Jewish bankers totally betrayed that alliance, and ever since the Jews have managed to make us enemies. Of course, it was easy to do after they created the Bolshevik Revolution and turned Russia into the USSR, which one of the first laws they ever passed was the death penalty for anti-Semitism, because the vast majority of the people who were running the USSR tyranny were Jews. In fact, that was an entirely Jewish operation. That wasn't an interior Russian revolution as much as it was a takeover of Russia by Jews from Brooklyn. I think there are still a lot of Russians who yearn for the days of the Tsar, because when you read non-Jewish histories of the period, Russia in that period of time, even though it's really besmirched by the Jews and made to be a very terrible situation, a number of other writers who are not Jewish say that the Russians had, under the Tsars, had reached the zenith of civilization. They had maximum freedom. They were kind to everyone, fortunately also to the Jews. And judging by the music they produced and the literature they produced, they were a highly evolved country. And let me just point out that in much more recent days, a number of writers who aren't controlled by the Jews have pointed out that the most highly evolved country in the world in the early 21st century was Libya, because just about everything they got in Libya was for free, because Gaddafi made so much money from selling oil and he didn't keep any of it. He spread it out among his people. And a lot of people, including me, think that the real reason for the invasion of Libya by the United States, the so-called no-fly zone that completely destroyed the country and turned it into a failed state, was because America, growing increasingly tyrannical and totalitarian, didn't want the rest of the world to find out that life in Libya was better than any place else on the planet, where everything was free, nobody was under any financial pressure, nobody was under any real political pressure, and they had undertaken to organize the entire continent of Africa with a new currency. It's like Gaddafi had enough money to create this new currency, and he was trying to spread that throughout Africa, and America didn't want any part of that, because America and the Western powers are making a whole lot of ill-gotten money out of exploiting the mineral resources of Africa, and they didn't want Africa keeping those things for themselves. So we see how the Jews, when they spot a country that's very profitable, they quickly go in and raid it and destroy it. And they've done it a couple of times to Europe, and now they're doing it in spades by inflating European populations by a factor of 2 to 3. They're bringing all these illiterate peasants and savages really in from the deepest, darkest Africa and from the oppressed countries of the Middle East to totally overtax the European countries. I've heard, I have quite a few German correspondents, and I've heard from many of them that there's a news blackout now on what's happening in Germany, because all of these towns are being overrun by immigrants who are destroying all the supermarkets and robbing all the houses. And you hear these stories about towns with a population of 1,000 given 2,000 immigrants to move into their town, so you can just imagine what's happening to their towns. I was particularly taken by the number of supermarkets that are being ransacked and destroyed, so that one pass of the migrants cleaning out these supermarket means there's no food for anybody from there on out, because the distributors can't get in and the people can't get in because there's nothing left in the markets. They've been destroyed. So we're not really hearing that on the radio, but I forget where I started out with this. I started out with Russia. What were we doing before that? We were doing, I guess we were doing, or what I was doing was Jewish influence on these countries, or just the Jews are destroying all these countries. They want all the countries of the world in ruins, just like Palestine, so they can utterly control everyone. And they pretty much succeeded. It's pretty much the situation in the United States now. I know personally they just cut my Social Security, which came as a shock to me because they cut it substantially. And I'm trying to call Social Security all morning, and I keep getting this recording that says, please call back when there's somebody in the office, and the office is supposedly staffed at 7 a.m., and it's after 9 a.m. I'm calling, and the recording is still saying there's nobody staffing the offices. So, you know, our government services keep eroding. Our government keeps taking more and more money from us. There's great news out. I don't know the particular details of it, but Obamacare is failing wildly, and all the insurance companies that were created to take on the new Obamacare customers are now all failing, so people who lost their other insurance and went with the Obamacare insurance companies now have no insurance, and there's a total mess like that. So this is all about the Jews. And as you know, I described you many times before.
German Chancellor Merkel is Jewish.
Let me just finish this one more sentence.
Go ahead.
because I think this is what we're going to be talking about today. I'm working on a story called Patriots and Traitors. It's like the further we go, the more we are betrayed, not only by government functionaries who aren't really serving the people at all, they're serving themselves with these fantastic salaries, but we're not being served by the writers who become very famous in describing what's wrong with America, but never attributing those woes to the people who are really responsible for them, who are the Jews who control everything. And as long as you don't talk about the Jews, you can go very far as a writer in this country. You could be like Alex Jones and amass millions of dollars by describing all the disasters that are about to happen, but never pinpointing who's responsible for them. And so the people who say they are patriots are really the traitors, and the people who say, who other people point out are traitors, are really the patriots, for trying to point out that we have a criminal government that is slowly strangling us all. There, I'm glad I got that out.
Well, you mentioned Germany. You know, the Germans were very productive. They almost all of the farmhouses had solar. They had dispersed their power and becoming more and more self-sufficient, especially in the German farm. I mean, the German farm country. But Merkel, the premier or president, or I don't know exactly what her title is of there in Germany, is Jewish. Her family's Jewish. Her mother was Jewish. Her grandmother was Jewish.
Yeah.
And I've got this that just came across, talking about Russia again. The Russian blogger Chipstone summarized the most salient points from Putin's recent speech. One is that Russia will no longer play games and engage in backroom negotiations over trifles, but Russia is prepared for serious conversations and agreements if these are conducive to collective security, are based on fairness, and take into account all the interests of each side. 2, all systems of global collective security now lie in ruins. There are no longer any international security guarantees at all. And the entity that destroyed them has a name: the United States of America.
That's right.
3, the builders of the New World Order have failed, having built the sand castle. Whether or not a New World Order of any sort is to be built is not just Russia's decision. It is a decision that will not be made without Russia. And as Russia favors a conservative approach to introducing innovations into the social order, but is not opposed to investigating and discussing such innovations to see if introducing any of them might be justified. Number 5, Russia has no intentions of going fishing in the murky waters created by America's ever-expanding empire of chaos, and has no interest in building a new empire of her own that is unnecessary. Russia's challenges lie in developing her already vast territory. Neither is Russia willing to act as a savior of the world as she had in the past. Now, Russia, number 6, Russia will not attempt to reformat the world in her own image, but neither will she allow anyone to reformat her in their image. Russia will not close herself off from the world, but anyone who tries to close her off from the world is sure to reap a whirlwind. Number 7 here, Russia does not wish for the chaos to spread, does not want war, and has no intention of starting one. However, today Russia sees the outbreak of global war as almost inevitable, is prepared for it, and continuing to prepare for it. Russia does not want or does not want war, and nor does she fear it. Number 8, Russia does not intend to take an active role in thwarting those who are attempting to construct their new world order until their efforts start to impinge on Russia's key interest. Russia would prefer to stand by and watch them give themselves as many lumps as their poor heads can take. But those who manage to drag Russia into this process thoroughly disregard disregard for her interest will be taught the true meaning of pain. And number 9, in her external and even more so internal politics, Russia's power will not rely on the elites and their backroom dealing, but on the will of these people. And to these 9 points, the blogger here says, I would like to add a 10th. There is still a chance to construct a new world order that will avoid a world war. The new world order must, of necessity, include the United States, but can only do so on the same terms as everyone else, subject to international law and international agreements, refraining from all unilateral action in full respect of the sovereignty of other nations. To sum it all up, playtime is over. Children, put away your toys. Now is the time for adults to make decisions. Russia is ready for this, is the world. And the text of Vladimir Putin's speech in an question and answer session in the final preliminary meeting of the Vladai International Discussion Club's 11th session in Sochi on the 24th of October 2014. It was mentioned already that the club has new co-organizers this year. They include Russian non-governmental organizations, expert groups, and leading universities. The idea was also raised of broadening the discussions to include not just issues related to Russia itself, but also to global politics and the economy. An organization and content will bolster the club's influence as a leading discussion and expert forum. At the same time, I hope the Vladai spirit will remain this free and open atmosphere and chance to express all manners of different and frank opinions. Let me say in this respect that I will not let you down and will speak directly and frankly. Some of what I say might seem a bit too harsh, but if we do not speak directly and honestly about what we really think, there's little point in even meeting in this way. It would be better in that case to keep to diplomatic get-togethers where no one says anything of real sense, and recalling the words of one famous diplomat, you realize that the diplomats have tongues so as not to speak the truth. I mean, these words are coming from Russia, and it's not what I would have suspected after being exposed to 50 years of propaganda. And the whole Cold War was, be afraid, be very, very afraid. The Russians are coming, the Russians are coming. They were simply using Russia and their control of the Bolshevik Empire and their control of the Soviet Union to make people fear the Russian people, who weren't our enemy, in my opinion.
No, you're right. That's exactly the point of the story that I'm writing here, is when, and it was all brought to light so that anybody could see it, when Syria invited Russia in to their country to take care of this group called ISIS, after Obama had spent the better part of a year spending billions of dollars to fake like he was fighting these rebels, but really just dropping his bombs in the desert. And Putin goes in there and cleans them out in a week and accomplishes something Obama couldn't accomplish in a year. So that made visible to everyone the lie that Obama had been telling.
Are you referring to ISIS? Isn't that the Israeli Secret Intelligence Service?
It is. And so now we have a situation where if Americans want to be truthful and fair and accurate in their observations, they have to side with Putin against Obama. which the newspapers are sure to call treason. And if you want to support Obama and the lies that he's telling about all of these countries he's destroying, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, and on, then that would make you a patriot, but it would make you a danger to the whole world. So what are Americans supposed to do? Are they supposed to be traitors who are telling the truth and speaking in the best interests of the world, or should they be patriots who support these madmen in Washington who are really working for the Jewish international bankers and out to enslave the whole world? So that's the new meaning of patriotism under the definition as put forth by the Jewish media, which influences everybody in the country, certainly, and if not the world. So we have everything is reversed. And in order to be truly compassionate human beings, we have to be traitors against this government in Washington, which is really not our government. This is a private contracting agency for the Jewish international bankers who are seeking to enslave everyone and kill everyone else who doesn't want to go along with the plan. So this is the quandary that Americans are facing, and how it's going to manifest and what people should do about it to get themselves out of this quandary and to solve the dilemma is to challenge every politician that we have in this country, first of all, to reopen the 911 investigation, because that is the big lie that has triggered all these other lies that have come down to us these last 15 years. It's the lie of 9/11 that produced the lie of the Iraq War, the lie of the Afghanistan War, and the lie of all these no-fly zones all over the world that the United States is executing on behalf of Israel. And every single candidate for President of the United States who appears on television and participates in these lame debates, they call them, I'm not sure what to call them, they're all traitors, because they are supporting a policy of the United States military machine to destroy all these countries who are opposed to the lies that they're telling. And the lies that they're telling are all based on the lie of 9/11, that this operation was caused by Muslim hijackers. I mean, the word is out now that the Muslim hijackers and the so-called Islamic terrorists who are being used as an excuse for military invasions around the world aren't Islamic terrorists at all. They're really mercenaries hired by the United States, especially in Syria. I mean, when you see the things that ISIS has done to people, I mean, really slaughtering people, you see what the United States and Israel are really about. They have absolutely no regard for human life. They have absolutely no regard for the truth. And we need to extrapolate that down to the American citizens who are listening to these debates and listening to the lame lies that are coming out of the mouths of all these candidates. None of them are admitting that the real problem with the world is American imperialism. And so, which has led to the question, among many other questions, excuse me, when we're preaching about the need to have an honest government and defend America, who is it we're defending? What are we defending? Are we defending this murder machine that's going around the world, telling all these lies and killing all these innocent collateral damage victims? Is that what we're defending?
Starting with Vietnam. Starting with Vietnam. I volunteered for Vietnam, and when I finally figured out that every plank that it was the United States that was supporting and had every plank on the Communist Manifesto intact in America, I became anti-war. Not anti-government, not anti-soldier, not, you know, if you're a Vietnam veteran, you bet nobody better insult you or look down on you in front of me, or you'll unleash a full measure of whip-ass. I won't tolerate you putting down a Vietnam veteran. But we weren't right over there, and we aren't right in Iraq.
No, I mean, our servicemen are victims almost as much as the people they're killing, because we can see all the servicemen who come home and realize what they've done and kill themselves. No amount of medication can keep them from doing it when they realize what they've done. I mean, we've forgotten so many American atrocities. The one that sticks in my mind still is Fallujah, which happened a long time ago now. It was sparked by the Iraqis getting angry at these mercenaries who were going around committing all these crimes without any kind of punishment. So if you remember, they took 4 of them and they strung them up in the middle of the street. Well deserved. And the Americans found out about it and unleashed this reign of terror on Fallujah and killed, I don't know how many, 350,000 people. They napalmed them to death, phosphorus bombs. And then you know, it's like that kind of slid past the American media. And the absolutely worst one, I mean, it would really be quite a contest to chronicle all the American atrocities that have taken place. The one that really got me, and one of the reasons it got me was because Gordon Duff supported it, was the obliteration of Libya, where there was absolutely no reason to do it. Libya has the finest living conditions in the world, and we went in there with a no-fly zone, and Al-Qaeda working for us, and the Jews opening a base there, and Hillary Clinton watching her ambassador get deliberately killed, which she could have stopped at any time, just like we could have stopped the attack on the USS Liberty all those years ago, and butchering Muammar Gaddafi in the streets, and virtually nothing was heard about it in the United States. Life went on in the United States. We passed right by it. That was the obliteration of the finest, most functional, most comfortable country on earth. All because Obama got up there. Obama, whose identity we don't even know, got up there and said Gaddafi was abusing his own people. Just like we said Saddam Hussein was abusing his own people. It was really funny. They made a big deal, really hilariously funny. They made a big deal about Saddam Hussein killing 200 people unfairly. So what did we do? We go in there and kill 2 million people unfairly. And this is what American, you know, who are we fighting for? Are we fighting for American people who tolerate this? Well, we shouldn't if that's the case. If the American people tolerate this kind of behavior, we shouldn't even be talking about this. We should just get the hell out of here, because there's really, you know, if this is the case, there's really no saving America. These people who think they have respectable families and have their kids going to nice colleges, which is another stupid thing to do, and go to church and belong to these civic organizations and are respected members of the community. These people are the real problem, because they endorse a system of criminality that is so great, so unfair, and most of the people who support this stuff, particularly the evangelical Zionists, most of the people who support this stuff have no clue that this is all coming down on them sooner or later, and it looks like sooner at this point. You know, we heard a while back, the only thing we were talking about was Jade Helm. Remember that?
I remember.
What happened with Jade Helm? The reportage on it just completely stopped. Apparently nothing happened. Of course, something did happen.
Gordon Duff was, I believe Gordon Duff actually had that right. The Jade Helm was simply an exercise, an IT exercise, and they tried to frighten Americans. They would have liked for somebody to go out and shoot a soldier operating on the streets in Big Spring for Jade Helm. I didn't encourage that at all. I said, if you're going to do something, you see a soldier on the streets in Big Spring or in Texas, go up, shake hands with them, say how's it going? What's happening with Jade Helm? What are you guys doing? What's your orders here? Not shooting.
Yeah, it was just
by the way, Jerry.
It was just a consolidation of the organization of all the law enforcement agencies coming under one umbrella. That's all it was.
Yeah,
which is serious enough. Serious enough. It's going to be important in the future, but nothing really happened at the time. But that leads us to all of the public events that have occurred recently. Now, when we were growing up, if we can remember back that far, when some disaster happened, and it was reported in the news, we were relatively sure it happened, and that the law enforcement response to it was legitimate. But now we have all of these attacks and assassinations and people going ballistic that are happening, but we're no longer sure any of them are real, because so many of them we know definitely weren't real. You know, it's like the one we can really sing out as not being real was the deal in Boston, where we were watching it unfold and we saw all these people in uniform crowding around, and we heard announcements on the loudspeaker that we were going to set off a bomb there as part of the drill that was going on, and then we set off the bomb and supposedly people got killed, and these two innocent boys were picked out and determined to be the culprits, and they shut down the whole city. We know that was a fake operation. A lot of the college shootings that have taken place, we know that they were fake operations. It came as a real shock to me that that assassination of the pretty newswoman was a fake operation. So it's like the American population, and maybe the population of the whole world, is in a tremendous state of cognitive dissonance, because what we hear on the news, we're pretty sure we can't believe. And yet the wheels of justice continue to grind on and put these innocent people in jail, you know, the case with that Boston bombing really got to me. I mean, Sandy Hook was one thing. That was when the cop came on after Sandy Hook and said, no one may challenge what we tell you or we're going to put you in jail. How much more information do you need to know about what that was about? But the Boston deal, where they found this kid in a boat, supposedly after chasing him all over the city, and supposedly he was armed, and there were 200 shots fired, but when they pulled him out of the boat, he wasn't armed, and he was in perfect health. But when he got to the hospital, his throat had been slashed, so that he couldn't speak. And then they held a trial where maybe he appeared and maybe a surrogate of his appeared, but he wasn't able to speak at his arraignment. He could only say not guilty or whatever he pled. I forget what he pled. He said not guilty. And then they put him in jail, and then they hired these hitman lawyers, these two lesbian lawyers who had quickly defended the Aurora shooter, Eric Rudolph, Jared Lee Lochner, same bunch of government employees who were paid $5 million to go over to Chechnya and talk to the parents and get them to approve of his defense by bribing them and promising they had a fair trial, and then coming back to the United States and saying he did it, and providing no defense at all, and declaring him guilty in a kangaroo trial. And I forget whether they've given him the death penalty or not. I think they have, actually. But he's never been allowed to speak. No objective reporter has ever been allowed to interview him. And this is not justice. This is the Soviet-style show trial. And this is what we have in the United States, where you can't rely on the legal system. If you get entrapped in the legal system, there's no way you're going to win, because you won't get a fair trial. And, you know, Americans waltz along and think that, oh, this is all going to blow over. Oh, this is just the way the government acts. It's not. It's completely different from what we had when we grew up. And as I say, you know, it's incumbent upon all of us who realize that there's something very wrong to question our neighbors about what they're actually hearing when these presidential candidates speak. They're talking about nothing. They're not talking about any of the major issues of the day. They don't talk about anything environmental. They don't talk about ever questioning what the United States foreign policy has done to the rest of the world. I mean, we've got a gun barrel to the temple of every country on earth. And if they don't toe the line and say exactly what we want them to say, we're going to invade them and completely destroy their country. And how Syria has managed to withstand the attack that the United States has put on them, up to the, I think it's just that the U.S. wanted people to think that it was these Arab terrorists who were doing the deed in Syria, when in fact the United States was paying the Arab terrorists to do what they wanted and furnishing all these brand new Toyota trucks for them and all sorts of weapons. And in that process, they didn't have enough command and control over these people, so that they just went nuts, didn't strategically take Syria out in the way it should have been taken out, and dallied too long that enabled Syria to say to the Russians, can you see what they're doing to us? And Russia said, yes, we can see. We're going to come in and fix the problem. And they are in the process of doing that. And by all of that happening, it showed the world that the United States has no moral credibility whatsoever, and that Russia can be depended upon when the circumstances are right to come in and defend these smaller countries against the depredations of the United States, which has led us to the brink of World War III. I'm really surprised it hasn't happened already.
Maybe it has. How would we know?
It could be. It could be that it already has happened. I mean, this shoot down of a Russian plane. I love the CNN headline. When I was talking to a guy in Russia, it turns out, that night, and he was saying how distraught all the people in Leningrad and St. Petersburg were because a lot of the vacationers who were on that plane were coming back there. I was reading the CNN website, and the CNN website said, well, the plane broke apart. We don't know why it happened. And it's like, come on. They'd never be that suspicious if something like that happened in this country. They'd immediately say the Russians did it, which is what they did at the time when the United States proxies and the Israeli proxies were invading the Ukraine, and the Malaysian airliner came over and was shot down by a Ukrainian jet, and the American press, the New York papers and Time magazine and all the TV networks said, oh, the Russians shot the plane down. Jesus, why would the Russians shoot a plane down? You know, it's terrible what but the thing of it is that the vast majority of American people, I'm talking 80–90%, still get their information from the mainstream media, and this is really the engine of the tyranny, where the mainstream media can say, oh yes, the Navy SEALs captured bin Laden, shot him, and dumped him in the Indian Ocean. And this is what winds up going into the history books and being put in the schools. And the fact of the matter is that anybody who's been paying strict attention to news events for the past decade knew that Osama bin Laden had died of kidney disease in 2001. And that all of the videos that were put out purportedly being bin Laden testifying about what he was going to do to the West. You remember those series of lame videos that were put out where every time you see bin Laden, he looked like he gained 50 pounds?
Yep.
He was a completely different guy every time. And they passed this off, and the mainstream media in the United States said, oh, yes, this is bin Laden. We should pay attention to what he's saying. So, you know, and I try to tell people, you know, I would really alienate a lot of people, as you may know already. But I try to tell people, you know, that you have to take another look at 9/11. That has completely queered history for the last 15 years. And you know, it's worse than that, too, because our history has been queered for much longer than that. I didn't really know this. It's just my reading in history that has made me realize that World War II, which, you know, everybody's still gaga about, is called calling it the Good War and saying all these wonderful things about what our brave boys did in World War II, and they did do some really incredibly brave things, but they were working for a nutcase who was lying to them, because it wasn't Hitler and it wasn't Japan that started World War II. It was the United States and the Jews who ran the United States, who had declared war on Germany 10 years before World War II started, as we all know now. But most people don't know this stuff, and it's to these people that the government sends its message. I've written this before. The government depends on the intelligence of the ignorant to get their platforms passed. It depends on people who are not paying attention and hear just 2 words or read a few words in the newspaper and think, well, I really know what's going on. It's like my sister, one of my sisters, is still going to vote for Hillary Clinton because she thinks she's the best candidate. And she barely listens to the news at all. She doesn't even watch the evening news. She just, looks at the cover of Time magazine, or here's a bit on the radio about Hillary uttering her platitudes. But the fact of the matter is, Hillary Clinton really ought to be in jail. That's not a joke. She's committed treason, and she supervised the assassination of that ambassador by not taking action to protect him after he repeatedly requested it for hours and hours. She and Obama both let him die because they didn't want, I guess it was to suppress the fact that he was somehow involved in supplying, this was before the invasion of Syria really happened, but he was involved in the funneling of arms from Libya to Syria to arm the Islamic criminals that we had hired to destabilize the Syrian government. And even today, it makes me crazy, because after all of this information that has been released, we still have Kerry out there saying, well, we should have talks, but they should be predicated on getting rid of Assad as the leader of Syria, and Assad has just been re-elected by some fantastic margin of victory, and it's like the United States are still saying it's really important to get rid of him. And why there is nobody rising up in the United States and saying, hey, wait a minute, Kerry, what are you talking about? Are you completely crazy about what you're saying? There are no presidential candidates saying that. And that's because they all agree with this blind, reflexive obedience that the entire American political system has accepted from Israel. It's like we obey what Israel says because Israel controls all the money that allows these candidates to run for public office. And so if you offend Israel, you're not going to get elected to public office, so you have to make the choice. Do I want to get elected to public office, or do I want to tell the truth? And that's why we have everybody in public office who don't tell the truth. It's really a sad situation. I don't see how we're going to get out of it.
How many of these presidential candidates, John, how many of these presidential candidates that we've got to choose from now have made that pilgrimage to Israel and bowed before that Wailing Wall? I mean, come on. That ought to give somebody a clue. And everything we've talked about here, I don't know, I keep getting flashbacks to watching. I was sitting on my boat in Miami, fishing off there, into the Gulf Stream, watching the BATF murder their 17 little children and their families. And people still don't understand what we witnessed there. I mean, that wasn't murdering people. That wasn't, ISIS murdering people in Syria. That was the BATF, the government, murdering people right here in our backyard, in my home state of Texas.
we've forgotten so many atrocities. I remember talking to somebody a few years back about the NAFTA riots. Nobody remembers the NAFTA riots, 94, 95 in Miami, where the cops were just totally brutalizing the people who were there, trying to warn us that NAFTA meant the end of American jobs. And, 10 or 15 years later, we can look back and say, yeah, it was NAFTA that really did it in American industry. But at the time, those crowds were completely suppressed by the police, and the newspaper represented the people who were protesting as kind of demented radicals, and didn't realize that the people who the cops were beating up were the ones who were trying to save the country. Yeah, so that's what we got. So that's why we keep doing what we're doing.
I first started this show. I warned people about what NAFTA was, what that was going to become. And we've got all this flood of illegals here because the farmers down in Mexico, Central America, have been put out of business. They've made them into corporate farms too.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a fixed game for sure. It's an interesting new form of revolution where they can destabilize. The Jews can send in hundreds of thousands of people who are glad to get out of their own countries because they've been so oppressed there. But they come to the countries they're visiting and they're just totally destabilizing, totally crime-ridden segment. And then for the leaders of these countries like Merkel and Obama to say, oh yes, we need these people, that's treason. That's a deliberate form of destroying the country that they're supposed to be leading. And because the Jews own the newspapers, that's really how they get over on everybody. The newspapers will say, oh yes, it's good, we're helping all these people. Well, we're helping all these people, we're destroying our neighbors. Well, that's what they want to happen. They want these countries to be destroyed, overrun, and turned into slave colonies that they can utterly control.
Now, somebody in my chat room, Jerry on my chat room, says tell the masses, talking about the mainstream media, to tell the masses these Muslim countries are hellholes, when in fact, like Tehran, Iran is one of the cleanest, most beautiful cities in the world. Iran hasn't bombed anybody, they haven't been aggressive. Yeah, they may be a Muslim country, but frankly, I'd rather be ruled in a Muslim country that didn't go out and bomb the rest of the world than I would a Christian country that just wants you to donate to Israel.
An isolated ranch in the South America.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. It's and I've talked about what's going on with Russia right now. Putin looks like a more favorable leader of the free world than Obama does. And if we support Putin, if we support Russia in their stance against the New World Order, then suddenly we become terrorists. We become the enemy again.
Exactly. Exactly. So the American people have to bite the bullet and choose what they want. They have to choose to be accessory to mass murder, or they choose to be traitors to a government that's not really a government anymore. Because when you look behind it, and I'm still investigating this too, but the various things that have happened in U.S. history, the incorporation of the United States into USA Inc. in 1871, the granting of corporate personhood in 1886, the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913, the bankruptcy of America in 1933. All of these things have turned America into from a responsive government, or allegedly responsive government, into a corporation that actually has no connection to the citizenry. They're a corporation with their own budgets, and they don't have to pay any attention to what the American citizens are saying at all. And you might say, well, they have to pay attention to it on election day, but that's not true anymore either, for two reasons. One of which is all the people who run for the important offices are guided by the Jews in order to get them the loans to allow them to run for president in this media age. And the other thing is, when the people who are elected, when you vote for them on election day, you can count on your vote not being counted, because they're all counted by computers, and the computers are manipulated and have been ever since, I believe, the 1988 election, according to the Collier brothers, where the computers determine what the vote count is, and you can vote for one candidate and have that vote switched to another candidate. And I'm reminded of the famous election of Bush and Gore back in 2000, when Gore won Florida, except for the minus 17,000 votes he got in Volusia County. And that's how Bush came to win Florida. So voting, forget about voting. Forget about it. Your vote is not counted. And it doesn't matter that much, because there's really no candidate to vote for anyway. When you look at the lineup of candidates, look at the lineup of Democratic candidates. You got two. You got Hillary Clinton, who we can pin numerous capital crimes on, and you got Bernie Sanders, who is the Democratic alternative and who has attracted quite a lot of attention, as these early crusader candidates often do. But he's the four-time communist mayor of Burlington, Vermont. So you have lefty Hillary and further lefty Bernie, and Hillary has recently been, by the courts, absolved of any untoward behavior in dealing with her emails, which again are serious crimes that demand long-term prison sentences, by doing what she did with her emails. And on the Republican side, you have a retired neurosurgeon who really knows nothing about political operations, and who said something very frightening the other day. I'm no fan of allopathic physicians, and everybody knows what that is. That's a mainstream doctor who believes in pushing pills and giving as many vaccinations as you can. And Carson actually came out and said, I mean, we'd like to hope for a candidate who was kind of up to speed on health issues. Carson said the other day that he believed in mandatory vaccinations. And the vaccination situation now is, at least in California, as I read the other day, that a child has to get 53 vaccinations before he can attend public schools. And you can just imagine how many of these vaccinations contain poisonous additives, and really, instead of preventing the disease, they actually create the disease, which was demonstrated in the recent measles epidemic in California here in the past year. So this is Carson. He's an allopathic physician. He's going to push every pill in the world down your throat, and we know most of those pills are bad. And he's the best Republican candidate. And we've got Donald Trump, who everybody loves, or seems to love. Everybody's quite enthusiastic about the way he's spoken and the irreverence that he's shown toward the system and the other candidates. But is this the person to lead us out of our mess? A guy who's made millions in casinos? A casino magnate who got his original money from the Rockefellers? Is this our great hope? And then you take the rest of the spectrum. I was really happy to see that Jeb Bush's candidacy has totally failed, because I'm reminded of what he said back along the trail. Where was he going to get his foreign policy expertise, since he's only been a governor? And he said that he was going to rely on his older brother for that.
That's frightening in itself.
That was the plan. And who are the other guys? You got Marco Rubio, who's a cute little Hispanic guy who's attracted a lot of votes because he's He's a kind of an upbeat cheerleader who will attract the Hispanic vote and the female vote. And you got, geez, who else is there? Rand Paul. Oh my God, what a disappointment he is. If he could have been anything like his father, not that his father was too terribly great, but anything like him, he might have attracted some attention, but he wasn't. As soon as he got elected into office, he put on that yarmulke and hasn't been seen since. And I can't even think of the other candidates. Huckabee, Santorum, all these people are brain dead and just uttering what their handlers tell them to say. So, and that takes us back to the question of who is it we're fighting for, Clayton? Why do we do what we do? Why do we try to point out the terrible things our government is doing and how how America was supposed to be more than this? You know, every time I say that, I get in trouble because there are always these people watching me out there. Why is this raining? Hang on. Hello. Yeah. Yes. No, I didn't cancel it. It was scheduled for tomorrow. Yeah. I certainly hope so. Right. And then I called him right back and said I made a mistake, it should be delivered. I hope so. Yeah. I will. Thanks a lot. Yeah. Sorry about that, Clayton.
That's all right. That's all right. You know, I've been asking myself this since what happened at Waco. I was awfully upset about what happened at Waco. I started this magazine, Free American Magazine. I started the militias. I started this radio show over what happened at Waco. But the American people who sat there and watched the BATF murder little children, burn them alive,
Yep.
didn't get outraged about it, didn't get upset about it. And I've been asking my question ever since, who are we doing this for? What are we doing this for? I'm not doing this to make money. I am doing this to inform people and try to make somebody realize maybe there's somebody out there that's got money that would be able to donate to keep us going, to let us reach more people. The ADL and Southern Poverty Law are funded by millions, if not billions of dollars from the banks. The banksters put them up to it. They financed them. It was Jacob Schiff that financed communism, and the banks financed communism. And we went through, 50 years of the Russians are coming, the Russians are coming, the Cold War, the Cold War. Who won the Cold War? Did we win it? I don't think so. I think the communists won it. The Jews won it. And they have been trying to put down dissenters, rebels, patriots ever since. I couldn't even figure it out, John. I couldn't figure it out. Why would they be so upset? Why would the ADL be so upset about an old biker from Texas? I certainly wasn't politically minded, and I've always held up the opinion that the Republicans and Democrats are two wings of the same bird, and the bird ain't a eagle, more like a global vulture.
Yes, indeed. Well, I don't know. I was just watching this. The CNN News at noon, 11 has just come on, and it's an interesting divide developing. The U.S. and Britain are saying that a bomb caused the crash of the airliner in the Sinai, and Russia and Egypt are saying there was no evidence of a bomb. So my analysis of that split is that the U.S. and England are trying to cover up the fact that the plane was brought down by a missile, which was fired by Israel. And that's what the U.S. and England don't want to be talked about. Same old stuff.
So, in other words, our media, CNN, is simply there covering for the Israelis. It's covering for the whole New World Order plan, providing cover for them.
Yeah, we got to get used to the fact that, and we should be used to it by now, but we're not. Is that what Israel does, the United States is doing, and what the United States is doing, Israel is doing. As we work together, we're basically one. We're basically a Jewish country, whether people don't like to realize that or not. But with all the Jewish penetration into the White House, the Congress, the Treasury Department, the medical profession, the legal profession, education, we are Israel. We can judge that by the applause Netanyahu gets when he comes to speak before the Senate. And I swear that if he were to announce his candidacy for president, he would win, because the Jews would have enough money to buy the election. They buy the election now. Actually, they don't buy the election. They buy the two major candidates who are both alike, and then maybe they manipulate the final election or not. But you know, we talked a lot about 15 years ago. We talked a lot about what a travesty of justice it was that the Supreme Court determined the election of the president when the recount in Florida went awry, and Catherine Harris called the election for Bush before the recount had been completed. And then the Supreme Court got to rule on her decision and picked Bush. But it didn't matter who they picked, because the alternative was Gore. And Gore would have done much the same thing as Bush did, although they said back at the time that Gore wouldn't have invaded Iraq, he would have invaded Venezuela. And we would have done the South American thing. That was his preference. But it basically would have been the same thing. It would have been the same thing in the last election. With, who was the candidate? Mitt Romney? Mitt Romney might have been worse than Obama. He was richer than Obama.
Clear Channel, and in charge of all the drug money flowing through the Bahamas down there.
Yeah, so we don't have a free country. And it's like you and I both know that, because we're struggling to get by. People don't listen to what we say as attentively as they do to what these paid shills on CNN say. And people believe the paid shills on CNN more than they believe us, simply because they're on television, because they have more money, because they have more advertisers. And it's a messed up situation. We're not going to solve anything with the candidates that we have. So it really isn't worth paying any attention to what the presidential candidates are saying in these debates, other than to maybe have some degree of fun and deride what they say is totally irrelevant, because that's what it is. But until we get a president who says, yes, we need another investigation of 9/11, and yes, we need to review why the Americans have such a connection to the Bank of England in Russia, not in Russia, in London. until we have candidates talking about this, we're not going to have an honest country. And we're not going to have an honest country because that's not ever going to happen. I mean, we'll have a complete destruction of the United States before we have that. Because the entire United States government is run by the same apparatus that in 1920 made Woodrow Wilson say, I have unwittingly ruined my country by signing this Federal Reserve legislation, and that the country is ruled by a small group of rich men who determine what everybody else does, and that's still the situation. Even today, they talk about it more openly. They talk about Sheldon Adelson and George Soros and these other Koch brothers and all of these billionaires who can determine who the president is going to be. And if you say anything, I mean, it's a terrible conundrum that we're in. You can't talk about Israel, but if you don't talk about Israel, you're not going to have any realistic solution to any of the problems that we have. So until we break our mental embargo on talking about Israel, we can expect the slavery that we're in to continue and to get worse.
Yes, you're absolutely right here. And I've been through this whole presidential candidacy. I traveled from Maine to Miami to California with a legitimate presidential candidate. Collins was legitimate. He wasn't controlled by the Rockefellers, wasn't controlled by the Rothschilds. And every time he got up to speak at every Republican convention, every cameraman on stage turned their cameras off and pointed them at the ground.
Yeah.
You know, and I realized then we're not going to solve anything by election. If the elections had been honest, Pat Buchanan would have been your presidential candidate. Alan Keyes probably would have made a good vice president. But they weren't even mentioned. The media controls who you vote for. There's no other way to see it. And the media is owned and controlled by the Jews, by the Israel. And they even admit that in their own stories and articles and papers.
Speaking of media, I talked to Victor the other day, and he said he had a real good show with you the other day.
Yes.
And he admired the fact that you've hung in there all this time and keep plugging away, and I do too. I imagine you talked about Willis Carto, because he works for American Free Press. He writes stories for him, and he had a pretty good idea of who he was. But this, the alternative media situation in the United States is in really bad shape as well. So it's too bad we lost Carto, because with American Free Press and Boyne's Review, they may have their minor faults, but there's I don't think there's anybody in the same class as far as presenting the historical anomalies that have led to this total artificial media situation that we're in today. It seems to me that when the Spotlight, which was the forerunner of the American Free Press, was in its heyday back in the early 60s and 70s, maybe it's true, maybe it isn't, but it seems like we had a more forceful group of spokesmen who were able to articulate the falsehoods of the mainstream government that was running the country and that we have today, whereas today we have a very few number of outlets to do that, and a much larger number of people who pretend to do that, but really don't get the job done because they aren't willing to identify the Jews as the chief culprit of the ills that afflict us. And so I think losing Carto, and maybe as time goes on, losing the American Free Press and Barnes Review, because they're going to be run by probably people who have less desire to make them work than he did, is going to be a great loss, because, as I say, we don't have enough people like you and me who are willing to at least attempt to tell the unadorned truth and get at the levels of power behind the events of the day that make things happen. We have all these other agencies. You know, I'm thinking of Alex Jones and Steve Quayle and Dave Hodges, and I'm thinking of Jade Helm. They were all too willing to tell us the miserable things that were going to happen because of Jade Helm, and now that Jade Helm is over, we see that very little has happened, and they have very little to say about it. You know, as I think about it, the same thing has happened with the melting Arctic ice cap, where we had, and I fell for some of this propaganda, where we had all of these people saying that, oh, we've only got a few years left because the temperature's going to rise and we're all going to become baked Alaska, spam in a can and all that, and all of a sudden there's a great silence about Arctic melting, because apparently it didn't melt like they expected, and now all the talk is about an ice age. So, you know, to some respects, a lot of these reporters like Quayle and Hodges have to have some disaster to point out whether it's real or not, and all too often it turns out not to be real. And that's not to say there haven't been disasters, because we've still got people dying from the pollution in the Gulf of Mexico after the oil spill, and we've still got, you know, environmental contamination happening from Fukushima, evidenced by the deaths of seafood on the West Coast and the decay of trees in the Northwest that have been seriously affected by something in the air, and it might as well be the radiation from Fukushima. But there hasn't been this terrible disaster that everybody has to run from, and you know, a lot of these folks that try to trumpet disasters and keep us worried about what's going to happen tomorrow are the very same people who fail to mention the major influence that has diminished our lives throughout our lifetimes, which would be the Jewish control of the institutions of America that have decayed to the point where, you know, the government doesn't protect us. The government protects, it's like the Department of Homeland Security. The Department of Homeland Security doesn't protect us. It protects the rich Jews from losing their property. It protects 97% of the government grants for Homeland Security go to Jewish groups who are protecting themselves from anti-Semitism. It's the same with America's creation of Al Qaeda. All of the violent acts against the Jews, all of the swastikas on the synagogues are produced by Jews themselves, so they can get more money from the government to protect themselves. It's a total scam. I guess that takes us back to the Holocaust, folks. And
you know,
I have a good friend in Ireland who did a website for me for about 5 years, and he's now started the Celtic People's Party of Ireland to try to get people to pay attention to the African immigration that is really destroying Ireland like it's destroying the rest of Europe. And I sent him a note this morning about this guy in Ireland who'd been arrested for taking a television and putting it on the town green and chopping it up with an axe. And you wouldn't think that was a crime that he could be put in jail for, but when he did that, he said he was trying to draw attention to National Holocaust Day, where people were trying to point out that the stories that they had been told about the so-called Holocaust of World War II, where the Jews were famously claiming that 6 million people had died, was a total hoax, because really only several thousand people had died, and it wasn't from being gassed. No one was gassed. No one died in a lake of fire. They didn't make lampshades out of anybody. But there were, by one count, by the American Red Cross count, 295,000 total people had died in the German work camps. And by the Associated Press count, 89,000 people had died. So that was a far cry of 6 million, and yet people like Ernst Zundel and other people have been put in jail for saying that the 6 million counts was a lie. And it turns out now it's been proven to be a lie. But all these people are kept in prison for simply challenging the Holocaust. Well, anyway, this crazy guy in Ireland who chopped up the television to bring attention to this was just given 6 months in prison for chopping up his television on the town green to try to point out that the Holocaust never happened like the Jews say it happened. And the judge said, in giving him the sentence, the judge said that the terrible thing that he did that was worth 6 months in jail was that he offended a lot of people by claiming that the Holocaust never happened. And that was why he gave him the 6 months in jail.
Was this,
so anyway, the thing
was
I
this
took
a
to
member
in
of
Ireland wasn't really impressed by that too much, because he thought this guy was a crazy guy. But it just points out the fact that if you do something that offends the Jews, they can put you in jail because they control the judges and they tell the judges what to do and he'll do it.
Was this Celtic Party of Ireland? I think I played a speech of his a few days ago.
I'm sorry, I'm not picking up what you're saying, Clayton.
The Celtic Party of Ireland. Yeah. I played a speech that he gave the other day. I don't know if that's the same one that you were talking about, but his speech was good.
It was good. It was good. He's trying. Yeah, he was the webmaster for John Kaminski.com, and then he had other things happen to him, so he couldn't do it anymore. But he did a nice job with that website. He did it for a long time. He did it for nothing. And he's a crusader for the truth. But he became drawn away by the African immigration into Ireland. Ireland has got all these black people around there and around the country, causing all sorts of problems, just like they are all over Europe now. I mean, they're robbing people. They're raping people. They're going into stores and destroying the stores so that people don't have stores to shop in anymore. And this is what the Jews want. This is why I talk about the Jewish destabilization template, and this is really the finest example of it so far, where they've managed to trick countries, because these countries have appointed left-leaning leaders who are willing to accept the idea that they're responsible for the poverty of other countries due to their imperialism. And maybe that's true, and maybe it isn't, but it's certainly no reason to bring hundreds of thousands of people over from these African countries who don't speak the language of the countries they're imported into, and have no desire to work. They only have a desire to have money and live an affluent lifestyle without really working for it. And what is lost in this whole equation is that, the affluence of the United States or Europe didn't happen overnight. It took hundreds of years of people really working hard and putting up with exploitation of vicious leaders and Jewish bankers, and overcoming all that and building nice lives for themselves. And all of a sudden these lives are taken away by a United Nations agency that says this country should take X number of refugees because of their guilt, and exploiting all these other countries. And yes, there may be some truth to exploiting these other countries. I mean, Africa's been exploited by the whole world because they weren't able to defend themselves. But it's quite another thing to say that this United Nations agency has the authority to overrule what people in these countries actually vote for and impose on them restrictions that they really don't deserve. In the United States, I think the best example is the example of Somalis, the people from Somalia, which is about the least civilized country in the world. You probably remember the episode that was represented in the movie Black Hawk Down, where we went in, I don't know what the movie was about, but what happened in real life was we went in there and tried to impose some kind of Pax Americana on us, and because it was so chaotic and full of outlaws, they ran us right out of there. But as a way to placate them, we have decided to import a number of refugees from this war-torn country and park them principally in two places, Minneapolis and Lewiston, Maine. And in Minneapolis, there's like 40,000 Somalis there who are wandering around the city wondering what to do. I guess a few of them have got jobs as bus drivers and municipal employees and such. But they've totally destabilized that whole country. I mean, talk about a white part of the United States. It's ridiculous. And the other part in Lewiston, Maine, where they put in 3,000 at one point and then a couple more thousand at another point, where these people have no business being in Lewiston, Maine. And the Jews in Washington and the Jews in the UN are saying, "Oh, this is to make up for the exploitation of Africa that the white countries have given." And then there's another part to that story where Obama has a proposal to insinuate hundreds, if not thousands, of blacks into white neighborhoods as a matter to balance the country racially, is I think the way he put it. And so white neighborhoods in the United States who have no history of blacks and no history of black crimes are forced to accept these blacks and third world immigrants just put there by Obama as his attempt to balance the country racially in all areas. And it's like nobody voted for this. Nobody wanted this. This is something that has been imposed by our Jewish communist leaders in the United Nations and in Washington, who are able to blackmail local agencies and ram people into these otherwise white areas over the objections of the local people. And people, you know, when you say, "Oh yeah, we're a free country," we're not a free country now, because we're run by really people of color, Jews who are people of color, and communist functionaries in Washington, D.C. who have taken their philosophy and made it the philosophy of the federal government. And this is, like I said, this is not representative government. We didn't vote for any of this, and we wouldn't vote for any of this, and yet we have to deal with it. So,
John,
it's really a whole,
is Renegade
really a whole lot
Tribune,
of things.
is Renegade Tribune, is that your website?
I'm sorry, what'd you say?
Renegade Tribune, is that your website? I've got a lot of your articles on there.
Yes, I have a section on there. It's not my website, though. It's Kyle Hunt's website. And there's not just me. It's really a tremendous number of really good thinkers, all generally grouped around the idea of white rights and independence from Jewish tyranny. So I'm very proud to be on there. I'm still on the Rebel, although the Rebel is now called 300. What is the Rebel called now?
300 Spartans.
The Rebel is now called, wait a minute, I can't remember the name. I don't know why I changed the name.
I believe that's 300 Spartans.
300spartans.com is the same as what the Rebel used to be. And then I have a lot of pieces on darkmoon.me. But my main website now is renegadetribute.com/author/Kaminski. And like I said, I'm happy to be there because there's really some great thinkers there, not the least of which is Kyle Hunt himself, who has radio shows on there. He's linked to some radio shows on there, and some really great thinkers with no communist infiltration, no Jewish infiltration that I know of. No, there's no Jews on there. And of course, the rebel was kind of the same way on a smaller scale. He still has Yukon Jack and John Nugent, and now he's added Brendan O'Connell. I don't know if you know who he is. Brendan O'Connell was slapped into jail in Perth, Australia, Western Australia, here a few years back for saying bad things about Jews. And he might have not done it the smart way, but he challenged them every step of the way. And they said, okay, you challenge us, we'll put you in jail. So he's out now. And I don't know if he can write directly, but he's writing directly. And that makes 300 Spartans. It's another good reason to listen to. I mean, to check that website out, because they have 4 or 5 good writers in there, including the writer himself, who are expressly devoted to exposing the Jewish tyranny throughout the world. And then Dark Moon, I don't know if you know Dark. Yeah, you had Dark Moon. We tried to get Dark Moon on your show, but she didn't want to do radio.
No, it doesn't want to do radio.
She has a website in England. She has a whole stable of great writers that she puts on there. All, again, loosely draped around the same story. Not so much white, not so much pro-white, but anti-Jewish. And, I mean, we need more of this, because the Jews have taken over practically every country in the world. And they're twisting the mission and purpose of these countries into becoming slaves to Israel, and which means when a country lets Jews take over their country, it means everybody else in that country becomes a slave. And that's what's happened. That's what's happened in America. That's what's happened throughout Europe. That's why Europe has been unable to defend itself against this invasion by Middle Easterners, is because the leaders they've elected, like Angela Merkel, are either Jewish or slaves to the Jews. Cameron in England is another example, and certainly Obama in this country, although every politician in this country is now slaves to the Jews. You know, there's only one person in Congress who refused to sign the declaration that they would support Israel under any circumstances. Do you know who that one guy is?
No.
I bet you don't. It's Walter Jones of North Carolina, who is I can't get it out. He's a hard-edged righty from North Carolina, staunch fundamentalist Christian, who just won't put up with anything. And apparently he's in a district where the Jews can't buy some other candidate to get him out of there. He's in rural North Carolina. So we need to protect him as much as possible, because he's the last of the dying breed.
Let me ask you here. This is something that I frankly don't understand. You know, we've got these so-called Christians that fundamentalist Christians. You know, it's whether they're Baptist or Methodist or Church of Christ. I don't know. Why do they, if they believe in the Bible and they believe in the words of Jesus, how can they just overlook the fact that Jesus told them to beware of the Jews who say they're Jews and are not, or of the synagogue of Satan? How can they just overlook all of that? And there was actually like a lot more than that. I think John 8, where Jesus really castigated these whole Zionist money changers. How do they overlook that? How do they claim to be a Christian and overlook what their Savior told them?
Well, a lot of them have been hoodwinked by these preachers, like Hagee is the most infamous one, and Joel Osteen is another one. Joel Osteen is actually a Jew. Hagee is only an honorary Jew. Was constantly getting awards from Israel by stressing the fact that protection of the nation of Israel is more important than the worship of Jesus. But the other non-Zionist fundamental Christian group, which contain a number of different sects, which I don't think have as many money as the Zionist Christians, as many members as the Zionist Christians do. They believe that the Jews are the synagogue of Satan, and they must be fought at every turn. And Walter Jones, I believe, is one of those. Yes, he is, because he wouldn't sign. He's the only one who wouldn't sign the document that all prospective members of Congress have to sign, that they will support Israel in order to get funding from the Jewish banks so they can conduct their campaigns. And especially in the big urban markets, you need millions of dollars to buy TV time. That's the way campaigns are conducted these days. Whereas Walter Jones in rural North Carolina probably didn't need to do much of that. He could just, go out and tell the neighbors, post signs up in his neighborhood. Anyway, he's the only one. But as far as the difference in the Christians, there are anti-Jewish Christians. Most of them are too soft for my taste. But there have been a lot of Christians stolen by the Jews using the Schofield Bible that has all the Jewish footnotes in it, and they regard the preservation of the nation of Israel as more essential to the preservation of Christianity than the worship of Christ, if you can believe that. Talk about twisted.
Now, I just came across an article talking about, and this comes from the Renegade Tribune, and it's got a Jew that explains the plan for white disarmament and genocide. Have you seen that one?
No, do you remember who wrote it?
I haven't been able to tell who wrote it.
Yeah, sometimes it's hard. I have to, can you send me the link?
Sure can.
So send me the link, and you probably identify it. There's all sorts of people I know. And there's all sorts of people with names you can't identify. Them. They are pretty liberal in accepting pen names, as long as the subject matter agrees with their basic philosophy. But ship that along. There it is. A Jew explains.
They say our Jewish enemy has won victory after victory, achieving societal destruction beyond the wildest dreams of even the most optimistic Frankfurt School communist. The destruction of the family, the sodomite agenda, shrinking white birth rates, foreign invasion, degenerate and poisonous culture, loss of national identity and vision, materialism and nihilism. It seems the Goyim have been completely brought down. Well, almost. Whites are still armed, and an armed man is not going to stay a slave for long once he becomes aware of the kosher change. It's clear this solitary case of sanity defeating Semitic madness remains a stone in the shoe of our enemy, and it has caused them to become more and more extreme with their propaganda. In the last days of the USSA, the communist agenda is now presented openly, without a hint of shame or fear from the nation wreckers. We're going to get your guns, Whitey, and then we're going to destroy you once and for all. This is the message from the mainstream Jewish media. The recent deadly shooting at an Oregon community college, like so many before it, isn't likely to lead to new federal laws designed to curb dangerous people's access to guns. Oh, we sure tried, though. We had our Schwoogie puppet on the Talmud Vision before the bodies were even cold, but the Shosgun just won't listen. Another useless crisis. While this understandably frustrates supporters of gun safety legislation, when gun control is not sufficiently Orwellian, here's the new kosher phrase calling for disarmed and helpless Gentiles. For your own safety, you unclean meat. Certainly you have nothing to fear. from your own criminal government or the rich diversity of Negro and a la Oteen garbage. Make yourself defenseless. It will protect you from harm. 2 plus 2 equals 5. The National Rifle Association's days of being a political powerhouse may be numbered. Why? The answer is in numbers. A conservative group that actually wins sometimes. What a powerhouse. Fortunately, the flood of third world savages who are accustomed to tyranny and can be easily purchased with handouts will turn the tide. Introduce a dangerous non-white scum, crime goes up. Gun grab in the name of safety. The Jews sets us up and knocks us down. Had enough yet? Support for and opposition to gun control is closely associated with several demographic characteristics, including race, level of education, and whether one lives in the city. White rural Americans who have never seen the inside of a communist indoctrination system, the most hated and relentlessly attacked minority in today's USSA. And they've got a little chart here. Violent crimes per 100,000 people. In Britain, it's 2,034. In the United States, it's 466. Who banned guns? Britain. The core of the NRA support comes from white, rural, and relatively less educated voters. This demographic is currently influential in politics, but clearly on the wane. I think you might have gotten them confused with this other group, which is currently influential in politics, but clearly on the wane, is whites wake up to their destructive agenda and wildly disproportionate influence. They wear little hats on the back of their heads, call other people animals, don't eat pork. Stop me if this sounds familiar. While the decline of white, rural, less educated American is generally well known, less often recognized as what this means for gun legislation. We all know about white genocide, but consider the implications for the helpless tan everyman slave promised by the Talmud. Polls show that whites tend to favor gun rights over gun control by a significant margin, 57% to 40%, yet whites, who comprise 63% of the population today, won't be in the majority for long. The inevitability of communist victory, I wouldn't start celebrating until you've actually won, Jew boy. Trends can reserve themselves quickly, and without the protective hand of white traitors, the minority is nothing. Racial minorities are soon to be a majority, and they are the nation's strongest supporter of strict gun laws. Constantly tightening timetables of white genocide from 2050 to 2043 is too soon. Our enemies will not be satisfied until every last white is in the grave, where they will continue to curse us. We owe these criminals no loyalty. The USSA is dead. Our race is our nation. After the 2012 election, Republican officials said the party needed to do more to appeal to the growing population of racial minorities. Shortly after, the term conservative entered our vocabulary to describe the useless and pathetic appeasement. Yet the party's refusal to bend on gun legislation highlights the difficulties of such efforts. In order to save conservatism, it was necessary to destroy everything it allegedly stood for. And then they've got a quote here by Jeb Bush. Immigrants are more fertile and they love families, and they have more intact families, and they bring a younger population. Immigrants create an engine of economic prosperity. I really love the idea of less on my own people, and that's the definition of conservative. If the GOP compromises on guns to appeal to minorities, it might lose support among its core white voters. The GOP is not your friend. Hopefully it will die soon. The country, however, is becoming less rural and more urban. Recent years have witnessed a significant increase in the number of people living in cities, with big metropolitan areas experiencing double-digit growth. Soon we'll have massive blocks of slums just like Brazil and other diversity paradises. Support for gun control is correlated too with levels of education. It would be more accurate to say levels of indoctrination. Of course, the NRA will continue to fight hard against gun control, but the heart of the organization's power is the voters. It can turn out to vote, and they are likely to decline in number. It's not like whites are going to wake up and take back their nations, right? Unless the organization begins to soften its no-compromise stance on gun safety legislation, it's likely to become increasingly marginalized and changing America. Sell out the big Jew. Everyone's doing it. It's the right thing to do.
Yes, I look at the top of that, and it says it's written by Modern Heretic, so it could be anybody. But stuff gets put on this website that is just generally in line with the thinking of the website, and this piece definitely is. Like I said, there are lots of good writers on it. We know who most of them are, but some of them we don't know who they are. As long as they agree with the general gist of the website, it's worth listening to, and it's certainly worth reading that piece.
It's it would be easier for us just to sit back and quit trying. Just let these people kill themselves, let them kill their families, and let them set their family. They're being set up for it. And I'm almost of the opinion here, if the people out there, the listeners here, our readers, don't support us, we get back to the same question that you asked. What are we doing this for? Who are we doing this for?
Exactly.
And I can't answer that question anymore.
Well, it's harder to answer it for sure. I'm doing it for Hunt, I'm doing it for you, I'm doing it for other laws, I'm doing it for Bruce Campbell, I'm doing it for, the people I know and respect and who are doing the same thing, but to characterize them as a large group is kind of difficult because it's not a very large group compared to the lemmings and millions of lemmings who listen to the radio and listen to the shows on CNN and these radio gurus and Alex Jones who are just trying to frighten people without without defining what the problem is. The nutrition of the United States, it's infected every area of the devil. It's infected our music, it's infected our arts, it's infected our entertainment, it's infected our education, our law, our policing, our food, our medicine. It's hard to go to the doctor. I've been spending the last couple of days visiting my sister in the hospital and on pins and needles because they get killed in the hospital. There's a common following the doctor's orders is the third leading cause of death in America. But there are other people that's the number one cause of death. So she went into the local hospital because she had an unspecified cause of pain in her abdomen. And they can tell you have anything. You've seen this stories recently of who have been told they have cancer, spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on treatment, and then were told they didn't have cancer. So, Jesus, it's like we have to best to stay away from doctors. If you eat the right kinds of food and get enough exercise and don't live in too polluted an area, you can generally stay away from doctors if you're just sensitive about the way you're living. But every now and then something will happen where you have to go see a doctor, and God help you if they put you in a hospital, because if you go into a hospital, a lot of people die from these staph infections and MRSA and all these other hospital-based diseases. In fact, there's a guy who lives in my apartment complex. There are a lot of infirm people in my complex because it's for seniors. But he went to the hospital and got, I don't know if it was staph infection or MRSA, but he is in his early 50s, and he's permanently disabled now. He can barely walk because he got some kind of infection in the hospital that never went away. So, Jesus, avoid going into hospitals if you can.
Try to avoid it as much as possible. By the way, this story just came across, and this may be a sign of hope for us.
Hope?
The Supreme Court in Mexico recently ruled that it was legal to grow, possess, and to smoke marijuana under the country's constitution. The country is now opening the door to decriminalization, possible legalization, in a nation that has been riddled with drug war violence for many years. The court ruled by a margin of 4 on a 5-justice panel, affirming that smoking cannabis is guaranteed by the right of free development of personalities. The particular ruling is in relation to one case which involves 4 individuals who wanted to open a cannabis club, but there are at least 5 other similar cases waiting to be heard. Their collective rulings could prompt a new wave of new legalization efforts in the country. For a country that has lost thousands of lives in the drug war, it's about time they considered a new approach. The long-term goal in Mexico is that the move toward legalization will cut off the revenue stream to organized crime outfits. You know, and it just backs up everything I've told people. Well, Clay, isn't marijuana a gateway drug? Yeah, if you got to buy it from a drug dealer, because he'll be happy to sell you your cocaine or your heroin or your methamphetamine or anything else you want. If I can grow hemp in my backyard, if I can grow cannabis in my backyard, or how did they put it in a country song? I'm going to start myself a marijuana money tree. This trend continues to spread across the globe, with many cities and nations looking to decriminalize or legalize, because it's a well-known fact that the drug war is failing. In those areas that have sought legalization, like in Portugal, Uruguay, Colorado, and Washington, the evidence demonstrates a positive response within the community. Surprising the critics, Colorado actually showed safer roads and decriminalized crime. Similar results are seen in other areas that have looked toward ending the drug war. The decision to move toward ending the drug war has proved to be a financially sound and positive decision to make for the community. Now that the Liberals have won the election in Canada, many are waiting for them to update the drug laws there as well, especially since legalization was one of their campaign promises. Now that the election is over, the Liberals aren't showing any signs that they're rushing to fulfill their promises. Canada's long-standing war against cannabis, largely born out of fear and ignorance, has proven to have no redeeming features, and many have come to realize that it's time to rethink our approach. Whether the Liberals would have won or not, clearly the trend worldwide is moving towards legalization, seeing as that there's no logical reason to keep this plant criminalized. And I wrote books regarding that 45 years ago. I'm going to complete them. I'm going to complete the editing and get those or make those available through my website and every other Amazon, any other place that I can.
How far did you go up to?
How far? What?
Yeah. Yeah.
How far is my book what?
What year does your book include?
Well, I wrote it 45 years ago.
So that would be what, the 60s?
Yes.
Yeah, there's been a lot of things happened since then.
Yeah, I have to edit it because my offices were stocked with IBM Selectric typewriters because computers hadn't been invented when I wrote the book. So I've got to do a little bit of editing on it. But it compares when you've got 46 states with no laws against victimless crimes, and you got 4 states that got the same laws they got today. The comparison between the cultures is stunning, I think, and I'm proud of the fact that I saw what needed to be done that many years ago.
Yep, Mr. Well, I don't know what to do. I just keep doing what I do. I hope it has some effect on something. But we need a majority to say we can't put up with the people who are running our country anymore. They're committing treason, and so people who are voting for them and not paying attention to the things that they're doing in the real world, because those things are horrible. I mean, the entire world might have had a good opinion of America at one time, but now they regard America as a country that absolutely can't be trusted, and will kill you if you oppose what they say. And that's what's going on. You know, one of the major things that we're not hearing about is the obliteration of Yemen, where apparently the Saudis are using nuclear weapons to wipe out I think they're the Houthi. They actually ousted the corrupt pro-American leader of Yemen, but the Saudis didn't like that idea because they wanted their own man in there for the mineral riches that Yemen possesses, so they have been constantly bombing civilian areas in Yemen ever since. It's months and months now, and we don't hear a word about that. I only happen to know one person in Yemen who I hear from every now and then who says it just keeps getting worse. And it's just, it's like what we did to Libya, and it's like what we'd like to do to Syria, and it's like we can get away with it because nobody's reporting on it, and we're letting the Saudis do it. The Saudis are a bad bunch. The Saudis are as bad a bunch as Israel. And what people don't realize, and what I didn't realize back in the day when 9/11 first happened and people tried to blame it on the Saudis, I was thinking that blaming it on the Saudis was an effort to take the onus off of Israel and blaming it on Israel. But I didn't realize then, and I do now, that the Saudis and the Israelis are allies. They're not enemies. They're both Jewish. The Saudis pretend to be Muslims, and but they're not. They were founded by a Jew, and they are allies of the Jew, and that's how their corrupt leaders, that's how their corrupt leaders spend all of their time spending their oil money in Monte Carlo and keeping their own citizens enslaved. But it's really a shame. What they did more recently was they have a ceremony that Muslims are supposed to go to once in their lives. I don't think I know the name of it. It might be the Hajj.
Yeah, that's the one in Mecca.
Muslims from all over the world have to make a pilgrimage there. And supposedly the first news story that came out this year about the Hajj was that there had been a logistical accident there where I think it was 40 or 400 people were trampled to death in a stampede. But then as further reports came out, Jim Stone was the first one that it was really thousands of people had been deliberately killed, and officials from Iran that they wanted to send to Israel to be interrogated by Israel because they were a part of the Iranian defense complex.
All right, we got one caller from the 845 area code. You got your hand held up there. You want to talk to me or John Kaminski? Nope, he just dropped. Evidently not.
We only got 3 minutes left anyway.
All right. Yep, we're out of time here. John, I really appreciate the work that you do. I appreciate I may not have you on every week, but I certainly share your articles and your opinions with everybody in my audience. I appreciate what you do.
I appreciate it.
All right, and folks, if you go to freeamerican.com, you can make a donation. If you go to shop.freeamerican.com, you can get copies of my book, Mystery Babylon, The New World Order Unveiled, and some of the fiction stories that I've done, series and Trevor Cameron, Terrorist Hunter. One Bloody Alabaster Eye and Deadly Flashes of Silver. It started out as fiction years ago. Don't reads more like current events now. But appreciate your support, appreciate you listening, and tell your friends, tell your family about it. All right, John Kaminski, again, thank you. You want to tell people your email there, how they can get a hold of you?
Yeah, it's Renegade Tribune /author/Kaminski.
All right. Thanks for listening, folks. We're out of time. God bless you all. Stay safe. Stay active.
See you later.
Bye-bye.